Okay. Good morning, Shalom Aleichem. Welcome, everyone. Great to have everybody back. Hope you're doing well this beautiful Sunday morning. Welcome to Chicago, Rabbi Karapkin. Great to welcome everybody to another Sunday morning edition of Coffee and Conversation during this very unusual time. It's a great zchus to welcome back to my life, Rabbi Daniel Karapkin, to welcome him to Chicago. Many years ago, before I was married, I had the privilege to visit Rabbi Karapkin's community in Los Angeles when I was still single for Torah tours, for Shavuos. And since then, he has become the rabbi of a major North American synagogue in Toronto. And more than that, pertinent for this morning, for many of those who are not aware, Rabbi Karapkin is the president of the Rabbinical Council of America, the RCA, of which I am a member. So I'm indebted to Rabbi Karapkin for his leadership. And during this time, it's been an extraordinary experience, both from a personal standpoint, but maybe you can reflect on a little bit in terms of making a wedding from a distance, you could say, but also from a national, what it's the stress and the intensity and what it's meant for rabbis in America, and having your leadership has been amazing. So thank you for taking the time and welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you, Rabbi Brand. Great to see you too after all these years. And I just wanted to say for your audience that when you were a bacher, what is this like? It's got to be over 15 years already.
Over 20.
Over 20. We already saw you. We knew you were a superstar back then, even though you were quite young, but you really stood out. And so I made a mental note at the time saying, this guy's going places. And Baruch Hashem, we've seen you flourish from a distance. It's wonderful to see you.
Very kind. So maybe can you talk for a minute just to share some insight for those Balabatim who are watching and listening and trying to understand what it means for the rabbinate, for the rabbis who are out there who are dealing with so many different challenges, and how the RCA, what is the RCA and how is it relating to and supporting rabbis during this time?
It's a really good question. I will tell you that virtually all the Rabbanim that I have spoken to since the pandemic started fall into the category of those people who are working harder than ever before. In other words, there are some people who unfortunately are out of work or whose work has diminished significantly. Rabbis do not fall, pulpit rabbis certainly, and educators as well, do not fall in that category. And so it's been very, very challenging to continue being relevant as a religious institution for each rabbi, to be able to reach out to his congregants without being able to connect with them physically. And so that's been the challenge. The role of the RCA has really been twofold over the course of this pandemic. Number one is to provide moral and educational and halachic support for all of the members of the RCA. And secondarily, to be able to provide guidelines for the general public, together with our sister organizations, the OU and Yeshiva University. We've all been working together using the poskim at YU, and most specifically, Rav Herschel Schachter Shlita and Rav Mordechai Willig Shlita. The two of them have really worked tirelessly using the RCA as it's the most popular vehicle of delivering their Piskei Halacha, their halachic rulings, to the general public. And so many of the policies that we've all become aware of through our individual shuls have come through the RCA's delivery of those Piskei Halacha.
We've certainly in Chicago been the beneficiaries of these because many of our shuls, many of our Kollel constituents are members of shuls whose rabbis are members of the RCA. And I suspect that many of the people watching have benefited from either seeing firsthand or secondhand receiving these Piskei Halacha thanks to the RCA. I could say personally, as a member of the RCA, how indebted I am to get that window into the world of halacha that Rav Schachter and Rav Willig, you should live and be well, and both of them have been with us on this program over the last couple of weeks to share their perspectives. How much we've benefited from that and what that has meant in terms of the hadracha that we have received. And even from a Kollel standpoint, some of the things that we've been able to either implement or share with the community has been incredibly valuable. It's been amazing. Anything that you have been privy to, that you've seen, that you could share, maybe a window into some of the conversations, like what is that like behind the scenes as a shul rav in Toronto who's interacting both with congregants, but also working with the poskim to set policy? Anything that you have experienced that you could share?
Well, everyone's joking about this word unprecedented because it's been thrown around so many times, especially in our communities. The unprecedented situation that we find ourselves in. So many situations where really um, great poskim are facing issues that no one in our generation had ever thought we'd ever have to face. And I know when we were developing the protocols together with the Orthodox Union, with the OU, as far as the reopening of our shuls, this is now, it almost seems like ancient history, but it's only about a month, 6 weeks ago. And we were talking around shortly after Pesach, what would the reopening of our shuls look like? Um, One of the most fascinating things is that the Rabbanim, who really were thinking with humility and trying to have pure halachic analysis, recognized that we know what we're experts in and we know what we're not experts in. We're not experts in pandemics. We're not experts in medicine. We have to rely on the medical community to be able to provide us with guidelines of what's safe and what's not safe. At the same time, the medical community itself as a whole, even people who are in the areas of public health and communicable diseases, were also struggling because there were so many conflicting messages that were circulating. First, it was masks are not recommended. Masks are not indicated. If you remember that about a month or two ago, I lose track of time. And then all of a sudden, now that masks are readily available, no, now you must wear masks. And so it became very, very confusing. And so it's to the credit of those poskim, the rabbis, who really tried their best to look at what the consensus is. I mean, this is a perfect example of, even in non-rabbinics, we still say acharei rabim lahatot. We have to follow the majority because many times, even among doctors, there's no consensus in something as nebulous and as new, as novel as the coronavirus.
So this is on a public policy national level, but this has affected you and your family in a very personal way. And maybe you could share with everybody what it's been like dealing with a pandemic, living in Toronto while your family is not all in Toronto, and what that's meant and how you've dealt with it on a personal level.
Sure. One of the things that I sent out to the members of the RCA, to my colleagues, in order to try and make an attempt to offer some chizuk, some words of encouragement and reinforcement to the guys out in the trenches, so to speak, in the rabbinic trenches, is that we all are going to be making sacrifices for the greater good, for the sake of our communities and for the sake of upholding Jewish infrastructure. And one of the things that I pointed out is my son was engaged to get married on March 28th. His fiance was from Montreal. And as we noticed that the borders were starting to close, my son, in his wisdom, flew his fiance to Los Angeles, where he was living, and he couldn't get out because it was in the middle of tax season and he's an accountant. So he flew her in with the bare minimum of just bring a suitcase and some clothes. And when it became apparent that the pandemic was intensifying, he just decided that he was going to get married. And at that time you could only have 10 people. And so he was going to have 10 people. And I booked the ticket to fly out to LA. And my family got very, very nervous. My wife asked me not to go. My children asked me not to go. My son asked me not to go. And normally I would want to be the guy under the chuppah, the Mesader Kiddushin, to officiate at my own son's wedding. And the reality is that I realized that, you know what, this is perhaps one of the greatest lessons that maybe God is trying to transmit to me, that you can rejoice from afar and you don't have to be in the middle of it. You don't have to be an integral part of it in order to be able to rejoice from someone that you love very much. And it was just, and I invoked in that message that there were times in the past that we Jews have had to, in the midst of pandemics, go and have celebrations and recognize that despite the things that distance us and keep us apart, life goes on and you can find rejoicing even from a distance.
So what did you do in Toronto when your son was getting married in Los Angeles? Did you have a little Suda in the house?
Yeah, so we ordered some takeout and from the local place, and we sat down in our basement in front of a big screen, and we watched on a Zoom the whole thing. They got married on a cliff in Malibu overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and we just looked at them and just, wow, it was just amazing. It was just a wonderful experience. The sweet was so much more than the bitter. I can't even, like, the bitter is so unimportant to us now. Thank God our son, after being single for many years, has found an amazing young lady to now who's his wife. And they've started building their home together. And you know what? They don't need us. They're happy, and I'm happy for them. And we told them, God willing, we plan to come out maybe sometime after all of the isolations and quarantines in Canada, start to wane. That's when we'll come and visit them.
What a beautiful message for all of us in terms of thinking about sweet and the bitter, and how even if there are bitter pieces, but trying to see sweetness. And somebody who is not in the same perspective might bemoan the fact that they missed their child's wedding and be all tzibrochen about it. But I think that is such an important and powerful perspective for all of us to have on whatever level. A child's wedding is probably one of the most important life events, but all of us struggle with various circumstances during this time. And I think it's such a beautiful and important perspective that you're sharing. Is there something that maybe to close it out back to the public policy perspective, is there something that you think that from a national and international perspective, it's important for people to understand during this time, during this reopening phase, based on the conversations that you're having with rabbis, that you're having with medical professionals? What do we as on the ground, just simple people, balabatim, what do we need to know navigating these new phases that we're going through?
Well, I think what we need to know is that there is still so much that is unknown, and we will probably still be in the dark about how this disease spreads for some time, until we develop a vaccine. God willing, it should happen very soon. And during that interim period, it is very important for all of us to struggle and to fight to stay connected to Jewish community. Not just the rabbis struggling to keep their balabatim, their congregants connected, but the individual congregant has to try their best to stay connected, because at the end of the day, it is a symbiotic relationship. We need you, those who are part of the general community, the mispalalim, the parishioners. We need you desperately to remain part of the community, and we recognize that the parishioners need the congregation as well to remain connected as a community. One of the things that we've certainly learned is that one of the reasons for reopening our cities and our societies perhaps more quickly than perhaps we should, if we were completely cautious, is the recognition that there's a psychological toll on all of us when we remain isolated. And so therefore there is a justification in taking certain risks, minimal risks, in order to be able to compensate for the psychological toll of not being part of a community. Community is so vital. We have to be careful. We have to continue to be safe. People over 65 should still remain at a distance, but in whatever way we can, let's try and stay connected. And the video tools that we have, the tech that we have today, is what really is the key to our survival as a community. And thank God for that.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, it's a hikdim true for Lamaka in a certain sense. Well, thank you,
Exactly.
Rabbi Karapkin, for the time. So wonderful to see you. Be well, stay healthy. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should watch over you, the whole Kehillah, and thank you so much for all of your efforts on behalf of Klal Yisrael. It's really amazing, and we so appreciate it.
Thank you, Rabbi Brandt. Thank you so much.
Great to see you.
Hatzlacha. Great to see all you're
Amen.
doing.
Thanks so much. Take care. Have a great day.
You.
So I guess it's me'inyan la'inyan bo so inyan, so to speak, to welcome Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Sova, one of Chicago's very own finest. I don't know, can you hear us? Can you see us?
I can hear you, and I can see you. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yeah, we got it. Great. All right. What's the weather like in West Rogers Park today? What's the weather like in West Rogers Park today?
Probably not so dissimilar than it is in Skokie, but pretty sunny.
All
and
right,
nice.
great. Muggy and warm.
That's exactly.
All right, for those who don't know, Rabbi Dr. Sova is a practicing psychologist here who sees many clients of different ages in the Chicagoland community, and it's an honor to have him. He's been a part of the Kollel in lots of different ways, teaching with us, learning with us, and sharing part of the Kollel mission in the community. So we thank you for always being involved, but especially for taking the time during especially the Sunday mornings, often either work time or family time. So we thank you for taking the time. And it's very important because one of the things that we've been focusing on over the last couple of weeks is mental health and giving ourselves and our community chizuk. We are delighted that you're on. We're actually going to welcome afterwards Dr. Yael Muscat, another health professional from the mental health field, because it's so important to give each other chizuk from a mental health standpoint. So maybe you want to open just by sharing a couple of mental health reflections for people to give us chizuk during this time.
Sure. Thank you very much again for having me. At the beginning of this pandemic, I was very nervous in a lot of ways about what was going to happen with a lot of the kids and young adults that I work with, and the families who were already under a lot of stress. Obviously, the families that I was already working with, there was a reason that they were coming to me. So I was very nervous in a lot of ways. I have to say, in some ways, there's a lot of silver linings here. I was really pleasantly surprised with how a lot of kids and a lot of families adjusted to this pandemic, where for whatever reason, and there could be a number of reasons why, the anxiety that was occurring in the world, maybe in some ways didn't necessarily affect them in the same kind of ways. They were able to handle it on a whole, from what I've seen. Again, maybe studies will show differently, but the kids who were already predisposed to anxiety, this wasn't necessarily even more of a stressor in some ways. In some ways, it actually helped them. For example, not being in school in some ways precluded them from feeling the anxiety that school would cause them to feel. So in some ways, this pandemic has helped families, helped kids in some ways. In other ways, it's fed into their weaknesses. So for example, kids who, let's say, have separation anxiety. So I work with a lot of kids who have separation anxiety, which means that it's very hard for them to be away from usually a caregiver and usually the mother, where they get a lot of anxiety by being independent, being in new places or even familiar places where, for whatever reason, they're nervous about harm befalling them or befalling their caregiver. Now for them, for example, this has been, the pandemic has, and the being able to be at home with their family at all times has been really helpful to them, because it's kind of fed into their weakness has become their strength, where they're always around their families at all times. But what it makes my work a little bit harder, because we were working on being able to practice being independent and being away from your families. So sometimes the strength, sometimes the fact that the families and the kids are doing really well is really just hiding the weakness that was being exposed back in the old world. So with those types of families, we have to be a little bit more creative to help them figure out how to not become comfortable, and to learn how to deal with uncertainty, which is the hallmark of learning how to deal with anxiety, is dealing with uncertainty. So while the rest of the world is learning how to deal with a lot more uncertainty than maybe for those who didn't experience anxiety before, and they have a lot of the kids and families who suffer from anxiety are now facing that hurdle now for the directly. Now there is some comfort to that the rest of the world is facing. It has some level of uncertainty that they've always had to deal with. So that actually, I've heard from a lot of kids, actually feels good to them, because other kids are dealing with uncertainty that they've had to deal with. Kids who have OCD, they are feeling positive that they were the ones who were always washing their hands, and they were always the ones who were afraid to touch things, and now other people are doing it also. Great. But now the challenge becomes helping them learn how to face their uncertainty in a healthy way, where helping OCD kids who have to touch things or deal with uncertainty about germs in a safe way, and helping kids who have, let's say, separation anxiety, help them learn how to separate in a safe way when we're all in quarantine, all at home together.
Fascinating, the double-edged sword concept. How actually does it work for you to help your clients, your children? Most of these are kids. How does it work in this digital medium? Is that a challenge? Is that something that you are navigating easily?
Yeah, that's something else that I was nervous about. starting this, especially working with young kids. I work with the youngest kid that I'm working with right now is 5, a hyperactive 5-year-old. So try FaceTiming a hyperactive 5-year-old. So I was very nervous about that, but doing it via video has actually helped me in a lot of ways that I wasn't anticipating before. So first of all, let's say I'm working with a teenager. So being in their rooms has some advantages where I can see, what the room is decorated with. I ask all kids that I'm working with who I'm meeting with them in their rooms, I ask them to take me on a tour, because especially with a teenager, what they're putting up on their walls has a lot of meaning and can open up different conversations and different ideas that I never would have thought of before. It also gives me an idea of like where they're trying to do their schoolwork, especially if school is at home. Show me your room a little bit. So one teenager has a bird flying around the room as he's trying to do his work. Not so conducive. Another teenager who was struggling with their sleep, I was able to look, what's that thing on the floor next to your bed? And he told me that it's a clock that projects in bright red letters on the ceiling what time it is. So a kid who has struggles with sleep and looking in bright blazing red letters or red numbers what time it is, that's not so conducive for sleep. It helps me open up different worlds into understanding them a little bit better. And in understanding the world a little better, and also maybe being able to intervene in new ways that I would have never thought of to ask before. But it's also had some other advantages. So, and it's also given me some new insights into kids that I don't know if I would have otherwise. So, for example, if somebody struggles with emotional intelligence, they have a hard time, a kid or a teenager has a hard time regulating their emotions, and also more importantly, in some ways, identifying their emotions first, knowing what they're feeling. Well, in the moment, I can actually pause them and say, don't look at me, now look at your video. And you tell me what does it look like that you're feeling right now? And it's giving me a lot more insight where they can actually look at themselves, and it's giving me insight into how their level of insight into their own emotional awareness, because they can actually look at their own facial reactions. It's also interesting because I actually ask different kids and teenagers, when we're talking, who are you looking at? Are you looking at me or are you looking at yourself? And I would say vast majority of time, especially when I'm talking with teenagers, they are actually looking at themselves and not at me, according to their own responses. And a lot of times when they're talking about something more emotional and they turn off their video, I thought that they would turn off their video because they were self-conscious about me looking at them, but they're self-conscious with their own feelings, with their own emotions. Even looking at themselves is making them uncomfortable.
That's fascinating. So when a kid, let's say in an interaction, when a kid will turn off their video, what does that signal to you and how do you respond to them? When you're working with kids, are you asking them to keep their video on when they turn it off? Because that's different than being in the office. If someone's sitting in the office with you, they can't turn off their screen.
Right, that is not there to mute me, correct, right. So, as a psychologist, what I do, and especially as a Jewish psychologist, I ask questions. So that's what I do. So if they turn off the video, what's going on for you right now? What are you feeling right now? What's happening? What are you trying to, is this some type of avoidance? Are you uncomfortable seeing yourself? Are you uncomfortable seeing me? And especially if it's a teenager, most times I'll be okay with that. I'll let it go for a little bit. Let them be off the video and I'll tell them that's okay. When you feel ready, you can turn that video back on. But it just leads to a lot newer discussions. Look, it also leads to some greater challenges. So for kids who get really, really dysregulated sometimes, they can just end the session at the press of a button. I've actually contacted the developer of my software to ask them if I can save that, because it makes my job a lot harder with kids who could just leave at any moment.
Has that happened?
It
happened?
It has happened, yep.
Wow.
That's why I have parents on call at all times to be ready to jump right back in if need be.
So maybe just reflect for us for a little bit. For those who don't know you, you have a very deep Torah background from your learning in YU and from your time in yeshiva, and that's still something that's a very big part of your identity as a Talmid Chacham, not just as a professional. So how does that part of your life and your learning and your Yiddishkeit influence, because you alluded to it a minute ago as a Jewish psychologist, how does it affect and frame the experience that you have as a clinician?
I'll forgive you for your exaggerations in describing me, but look, the way I see it is that my job is to help people find their Bechira Chavshis, be able to unlock their Bechira Chavshis. So I see my job, and I make it very clear, especially with teenagers who are very cautious about people judging them. I make it very clear I'm not a mashgiach in the room, I'm not a rabbi, I'm a therapist. I'm there to help them be able to uncover what is holding them back from actualizing their true selves, and by helping them find and define their own values. So if there's something that's holding them back from being able to exercise their Bechira Chafshis, I think it's such a crucial job. Let me try to remove those obstacles so a person can truly find themselves, as opposed to being shackled by whatever's holding them back.
And for those of us who have adolescents living in their house, I happen to have one right now, or maybe two. So what are some of the things that we should be aware of? You know, everybody has on the spectrum of mental health, you know, strengths, challenges, values, exploration. So what should we be aware of as we're, for those of us who are parents, who are trying to help our kids? We want to guide them. We want to provide structure for them. Almost everybody in the community, their kids are now off the cliff of school and are in, you know, either total free fall or maybe some light structure at some point for the summer. What do we need to know as parents to support our kids from your perspective?
I have to say, I've been the most concerning population that I've worked with through the pandemic. You know, I try to open up with some positivity, some silver linings, but a lot of teenagers have been suffering a lot from what I've seen. You know, as I'm sure, you know, maybe you know from your own home with your own teenager in the house, but sleep cycles are completely off. Teenagers are always a little bit nocturnal, but you know, it's fallen off the edge from what I've seen with a lot of the teenagers that I'm working with in terms of their sleep. Also, there's a lot of emotional regression. So look for more acting out, more snapping at parents. I'm seeing a lot of emotional regression, and just a lot of social isolation. So I think there are some teens who are, you know, completely not social distancing anymore, and there are those who just maybe who are more prone to anxiety and less confident socially, where they've really gone on lockdown on themselves, where they, not necessarily for the health reasons, but they've just become like, and this is what's concerning, this like lethargic blah of, yeah, not really seeking out emotional social activities, not seeking out social connections, and being fine just binging all day long. And that's concerning. And this like kind of this lethargy and this lack of energy is concerning. So I think it's really important to help teenagers find some meaning in their daily lives, like you said, especially with school being over and a very unstructured, you know, unsure summer ahead. So helping have a conversation, trying to open up conversation with teenagers about what can we do to make this summer meaningful for you? What can we do? And working together with them, not imposing on them, but having a conversation with them about how can I help you structure your day a little bit so that the summer just doesn't feel like a complete waste and doesn't feel like blah. Like, you know, ask them, does this feel good? How can I help you? How can we partner together to make this feel better? Do you need my help in waking up? Right? As opposed to screaming at them that Zman Kriyashma is coming up. You know, partnering with them and helping them come up with something and helping them come up with some structure of the day. If that means that you put a teenager in charge of one of the younger kids, that's a win on. That's killing multiple birds with one stone. You're helping them find meaning. You're giving them some structure. You're giving some taking some you know, some of the stress off of your daily life. So it's really important to try to figure out some ways with teenagers how they can have meaning, how they can have some structure, and then how you can help in that process. But I think with teenagers, especially because with the regression as well, it is important to try, not to force, but try to like motivate them, try to push them a little bit to go out of their comfort zone. Because I think a lot of this right now is not just, there's some teenager, you know, developmentally appropriate teenager stuff going on, but there's also some of this lethargy and this avoidance and anxiety that's happening that might be under the surface, where they might need a little bit of a push to be able to push themselves out of that uncertainty and out of that blahness that they've been in.
It's certainly helpful for us, just, you know, as listening as a validation to say, you know, if my child is having that struggle, someone else's child, that should be, you know, it should be understood as normal, and that a lot of kids are going through that, and that you just got to figure out a way to partner.
Right. And you do need to give them their space because it is normal. Right. So it is important, especially when everyone's in the house all day long, that they do need their space. Let's not be so concerned about them being in their rooms a lot, but you're right. But trying to find some way to get them to expand themselves a little bit, despite it being common right now. Engage, exactly.
Amazing. We could go on for a long time. It's so appreciated. Beautiful and powerful, important insights. Thank you for the time. Stay well.
You as well.
Regards, Michal. Take care. Have a great week. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. So beautiful. When we're talking mental health, we can welcome a special guest from the East Coast, although I believe that she made a very incognito appearance briefly in Chicago, if my Zoom did not deceive me, for a recent Simcha, Baruch Hashem. Delighted to welcome you, Dr. Yael Muscat. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back to Chicago, now virtually.
Thank you so much for having me. Hold on
Oh,
one
great to have
second.
you.
Am I not seeing you?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Hold on one
Nope,
second.
I see you and hear you now.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm not seeing you. I apologize.
That's okay, but we see you.
I'm not sure what happened here.
Can you hear me?
Okay, here I am. Okay, thank you so much for having
Awesome.
me. Yes, yes, I see you.
So
For having
welcome,
me on your
Dr.
program.
Oh, wonderful. Dr. Muscat, for those who don't know, is, I guess you could say, she's the mental health supervisor. She's responsible, I guess, for the spirit, the emotional well-being of, I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of students in Stern College for Women in New York. I believe she's coming to us live from an undisclosed rabbinic home location in Oceanside, New York. So I don't know how it is that you are managing to be a Rebbitzin for your community, a mom for your kids, a grandmother, working with the Stern students. Maybe talk us through a little bit about your juggling these days, how that's going.
Thank you so much. So I think that I'm actually doing pretty much what most people are doing now, right? I think I just saw something like 40% of people are saying that their workday is longer now than it was before. So I think, we're all kind of experiencing this kind of juggling that's, going on. I'm happy to say that at the counseling center, we were able to continue sessions with our students, both at the men's campus and the women's and graduate schools. So, and that was not just me in any way, that was our whole staff really continuing to have sessions. And so there was that piece of it. And, I think being home had its own advantages. We kind of put most of our emotional energy, I think, in the home, and then kind of try to, at least that's how I think I did it, and try to, and to our families that were away and needed our attention, like my mother is alone in another city. So, giving a lot of attention to that. My father is away. So I think to me, it looked like changing the way we do things. Priorities seem to have centered in on the family, and then a little bit using all our extra energies in all the ways that we were needed. I think that's how I found the balance to be. But I think knowing that we were all in the same boat helped. I think we all gave each other that leeway to kind of focus on the home and then outward from there.
Beautiful. So Dr. Silva just talked a lot about adolescents and kids. Can you give us a window into understanding I guess you call them older adolescents or young adults who you're working with, and how you're supporting them during this challenging time during their college years?
Yeah, so I think that's really a great question. I think it's been interesting to see what's been challenging for them specifically. And we're even seeing a difference between the college students and the graduate students. I think this is a specifically difficult time for college students to be going through something like this. If we think developmentally what they're supposed to be doing now, right? They're supposed to be separating, they're supposed to be making their own identities, they're supposed to be finding and deciding on their careers. And all of these things kind of got interrupted. It's very hard to separate from your family when you go back home. It's very hard to decide on a career when options and internships and things like that got canceled. So, I think dating, had its own challenges. I think in some ways there were things that worked out very well with it, but they definitely had to change their mindset. So I think it interrupted them in a very crucial time. On the other hand, I found that they were very resilient. They were able to go home. They were able to continue with their classes, most of them. So I think that they were able to bounce back, but I did feel for them in the developmental things that they didn't get to experience in general, the summer programs, the graduations, all of those kinds of things. So the one thing was that we were also, we were able to help them, and they were able to see the resilience that they got out of it, becoming more adaptable. So something didn't work, so they tried something else. And I think like going into life at this stage, it's also a very important lesson. So, and then with the graduate students, I actually think they found it even harder because they were really about to, start jobs and things like that may have gotten canceled. So I think there was a little bit more panic for some of them as well.
So how do you support those students who are missing out, the ones who are acutely affected by these disappointments and changes?
Yeah. And I'll also add to that, the students going home to what, for them may have been a hard situation. I think thankfully for many students, they went back to things that were wonderful. Even if they had to adjust to it, they had support there. But for some, there were very difficult situations that now they had to go back to. I think a lot of it was support, like you said. This wasn't necessarily the time for the most exploratory type of therapies. This was a time for support, helping them have coping skills, helping them remember all the things that we talk about all the time: mindfulness, exercise, self-care. I think we did a lot of talking about that before. This was about helping them implement these kinds of things in very challenging situations, helping them seek out support in places they may not think of it, reminding them to, reach out to their friends, reminding them to not get isolated. We did, as much as we could, some programs that they could kind of watch and join into. But I think the more peer support they were able to get also, we tried to encourage that. Schedule.
Is anything happening? Is anything happen during the summer for students in this unusual time? How does that work? Because now they're not technically enrolled, they're not around. So what happens to those kids, those adults?
Right, those young adults, right, who kind of, so look, I think that some of them have been able to find things to be able to do. I think the summer isn't a time that they're used to necessarily being in school. So in some ways there's less changes. And I also think we've evolved to get into the summer. So the disappointments that they had that their summer programs didn't work out are following other disappointments. So they're kind of, unfortunately, getting used to some of that. But we're also encouraging them to look for other opportunities. And some of them are really finding things. Specifically Yeshiva University has done amazing things in their career center. A lot of departments coming together to provide opportunities, which I think is just an example of what's going on around the country. Like, people are coming together to find things, and to, departments that didn't normally work together are working together, things like that. So we're doing our best.
That's awesome. So maybe if you could shift gears for a little bit, because as you mentioned earlier, you have family, whether it's a generation above or a generation below, who is all over the place.
Yeah.
And how have you found ways from a mental health standpoint? There are a lot of people out there here in Chicago and everywhere who we have family who are in different places and we're distant from them. And how have you found staying connected with people? What's been helpful for you?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, I'll just introduce that by saying that I think this is an interesting time for psychologists, because we're all going through everything at the same time as everybody else that we're talking to, right? And the truth is, I think that happens anyway, but I think it's very transparent now. Everybody, you can't hide things in any way. And that's not that we're trying to hide, but we can't even try to have an objective point of view. We're all in the same boat. So I'm trying to do many of the same things that I'm telling everybody else to try to do. Really sort of prioritize, know the things that at the end of the day, I don't feel good if I didn't do. So certainly speaking to my immediate family, I'm connecting to people all over the world that I never did before, checking in, things like that. Also kind of understanding that we have to slow down. If I have to spend more time with certain family members, it's okay that I didn't get certain other things done. And I'm finding that's hard. I think we're very hard on ourselves. We want to get everything done. We have to kind of be okay with taking care of the important things, the connections, the family. So for me, I guess I would say a little bit of prioritizing, trying to do some of that self-care. I'm not going to say I do it as well as I think I should, but trying to implement the exercise, the routine, trying to, the faith things, trying to build up some of that as well. So, a little bit of everything that I've been telling others to do, and friendships, trying to reach out to friends as well.
And in terms of what you're seeing and hearing in your own community, how have people been responding? What kind of things are happening in the community, in the neighborhood, in Oceanside, that you found have reflected that resilience that you talked about, that connectivity?
Right. So that's what I think is really interesting. I mean, I think people have really been quite resilient in a lot of ways. It's interesting the things that have come out. And I'm sure all of your speakers are saying the same thing in terms of the small kindnesses that people are doing, whether it's taking Shabbos walks and visiting the people who are alone, making packages, but even like the small things, the drive-bys. Like, I've been very moved by those drive-by things that people are doing for graduations. Unfortunately, we had a day here where one was for a levaya and one was for a bar mitzvah. I think that's very sums up what's going on. So other ways to touch people's lives that I think people have really been good about. We have a WhatsApp group that's very, very alive, so to speak, and a lot of people shopping for each other, doing favors for each other. So there's been a lot of that support. My hope is that it continues in the next stage that we're about to enter now, and I believe it will. But I found that people were very supportive of each other.
And how about the women in the community? I think it's going to be interesting. I know in Chicago, the schools, the CRC schools are now in that reopening phase.
Right.
But I don't know, we didn't have, first of all, we didn't have Shabbos Minyanim yet, not in Or Torah, not in Choveh here in Skokie. In other schools they did, but we haven't had. But even so, during the week, and I'm sure when it opens, I believe, God, please God, this week or next week, most women are not going to be in shul. I know that they have opportunity, but that's not going to be a reality. So how can women who, for some, shul is an important part, both from a spiritual and religious Avodas Hashem standpoint, but for many from a social standpoint, and how are they going to stare down a summer of not seeing friends in shul? What is that? I don't know if you're hearing anything or what the conversation is like from the women's side of the Mechitza about shul reopening. I only heard from the men's side.
Right. Every community is very different, and I don't want to overstep in any way. But I'll tell you, I think some of my feelings. Well, first of all, we're in a position where we are trying to open as much as we can for women as well. But there's no youth programs. So women, aren't going to be able to necessarily come anyway. We have particularly some of the women, we have one group of women davening on sort of just a women's davening where they daven together after the men come home, and people are attending that. I don't know, this doesn't answer your question, but I think it's an interesting point that there's been a lot of focus on spirituality coming back to the home now, men davening at home and how that, brings Kedusha to every part of the home. And that's beautiful, but women have been doing that for many, many, many years. So I think we need to remind ourselves that that's still an important thing. I think that women are finding ways to socialize. I mean, in addition, I do think it's incumbent on us to make women feel like they're part of the next stage, and at the same time to feel like their role will, it will all come. It will all. I think it's in a sense a broader issue. When we re-enter, to not forget all the things that we talked about when we were in the first stage of all of this. The unity, the importance of being connected. We have to just remind people, every community is going to do it their own way. Let's focus on the positive. I found that overall, if women know that they are going to be thought about, they're going to be okay with it. If they feel like they're not being thought about in the process, that's when I think people get a little bit upset. That's my thinking on it.
Interesting. And I certainly could say from my own experience as having been davening at home and watching the home side of things for several months now in a new way, I've definitely appreciated so many of the small elements of the Kedusha in the home that I wasn't necessarily privy to before, both from seeing what my wife does, but also experiencing for myself. Let's say, Shalosh Shudas is usually in shul, whether it's learning with my boys or listening to someone, whatever that is, but now having Shalosh Shudas as a family. So I think that it's an interesting question, and maybe we'll close with this. Any specific ideas, things that you've seen now that we can project forward, that we should be thinking about as we're getting out of this pandemic? Mirza Hashem, their Bolshevik will drop a vaccine in our lap and then we'll be home free. But when that happens, everybody comes back to normal. So what are the things that we can and should take with us when we get back to normal?
Yeah, and I think we have to actually recognize that there's an in-between, and that's really when we're in now. I would think we all wish to just go back, but we're really in this re-entry phase. And I think one thing to alert ourselves to is that there's something called re-entry anxiety, actually, which I have a feeling a lot of us, I think, are feeling like we're about to go back. And I think like some of us are looking back. I hear people say, oh, it was so nice. All of a sudden, it was so nice in those days when, we would just, and I think what was nice when we were just at home, and I think what was nice about that time was that we were being told what to do. It was hard, but we kind of knew what we had to do and we did it. Now there's a lot of new skills we're going to need to use. We need to make decisions. We need to kind of deal with the new anxieties that are going to be different people are going to have about how to go in. And I think what we need to think about is, what did we take from what we just experienced? So I think being kind was something that really helped people, like doing kindnesses for others. I think now we can be kind in different ways. We should be not judgmental of other people. We have to make decisions for ourselves, but we can think about having bitachon, not just that God is doing for the best, that God will guide us in the right decisions. We have to enforce that kind of thing. We have to acknowledge that we're still going to be stressed. We have to acknowledge that, this whole thing about dealing with uncertainty, we're still in uncertain times. Remind ourselves that we can do that. And to me, I think the more meaning we can make of what's been going on in the past, the more we can kind of get to the new phase better. So the more we can say, this was a good part of, this was difficult, but I got something out of it. What did I get out of it? And then let's see if I can get something out of the next stage as well. So not to make it like a sudden end. Okay, that's over with. Consciously with your family, think about what you want to take for the future. And that's easier said than done, but even a few conversations about it, I think, can be helpful.
Awesome. So hopefully we'll have those conversations. Thanks so much for taking the time. Great to see you.
Thank
Look forward
you.
to seeing you
Thank you
back
for
here
inviting
soon.
me. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Have a great day. Regards to your entire family.
And same to you and the city of Chicago.
Thanks so much.
Okay,
Great to have you. Have a great day.
thank you.
Our final guest this morning, coming to us from, I guess you could say, New York, Yerushalayim. How do we define that exactly?
A little bit of both, yeah.
A little bit of both. Rabbi Steve Berg, Shalom Aleichem. Welcome back to Chicago. An old friend of the Kollel, of mine, of someone who has been part of our Kollel in the past, and now welcome you back in your Aish HaTorah role. So it's great to have you.
Thank
And you
you.
have had a unique perspective on this pandemic, overseeing an institution that spans the globe and especially focusing in Yerushalayim, Mir HaKodesh. How have things been going from an Aish perspective?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here, Brand. I'm a fan of yours and Chicago and the Kollel and all things in between. I started my career in nearby Detroit and spent a lot of time in Chicago, and I think it's just one of the greatest towns out there. In terms of our perspective, it's been fairly interesting because I think we have one of the only yeshivas in the globe that never really shut down, because when a lot of our students left kind of at the start of things in Israel, we had about 80 to 90 students who stayed, who just didn't really have a place to go. A lot of our students are older, are in their mid to late 20s. And so we basically found ourselves caring for 80 to 90 students, making sure they had food, making sure that the dorms were safe, making sure we were, keeping into all the rules and regulations of the health ministry. And really, we had just the entire way through, we've had boys in the yeshiva. So it was a challenge and an absolutely incredible experience. So that's on one side, being across from the Kotel and having those boys there all the way through Corona. And the other side is just being around the world, not only with our branches in so many cities around the world, North America, Latin America, and so many other places, but also just online. Aish.com, sees well over 1 million people per month, and just engaging in so many Jews and that constant when everything was going on and making sure we could be reaching out to them, they could be reaching out to us. So for us, at Aish, it's really been quite a journey over the past few months to make sure that we could take care of everyone physically and spiritually along the way.
Amazing. So how do you balance as an organization the local and then the global? Because the local outpost or the local yeshiva has one particular flavor versus, Aish.com, like you said, countless Jews, non-Jews of all stripes. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, we have the physical presence, Jerusalem and other places, and we have this online presence. The online presence is really an extension of who we are in Jerusalem. And one of the programs I think perhaps I'm most proud of is something we started really in the last 2 years, but it's picked up in the last year. And that is, it's called a live chat, where if someone goes to Aish.com and you're on there for, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever it is, during kind of the daytime hours in North America, a rabbi will reach out to you and say, can I help you? How are you? And so literally we become rabbis for people all over the world, just in terms of connecting them to Judaism and really helping them on their journey. So that's been pretty amazing, but it's really a reflection of our hashkafa, our outlook. Our building, the Aish World Center, I always jokingly call it the United Nations of the Jewish world. We see about 200,000 people a year, obviously when it's not Corona, just all languages, people coming to building. We hosted the Vice President Pence last year, who stopped by to do an interview overlooking the Kotel. So it's really, we're just really believing keeping ourselves wide open to people, making Judaism into something that's very palatable and easy to explain, because a lot of people have zero background, but also keeping up with intellectually high standards. If you were to go to the yeshiva, someone that comes in there, usually they have a college degree, they're post-college, The question is, once they learn Aleph Beis, and the first thing that we really do with them is Ulpan, because the truth is, we're getting way less students today that know Hebrew than we used to get years ago. So this, they get into Ulpan and learn Hebrew, but then there's that challenge to get them into learning Gemara, Tosfos, and really seeing the rich intellectualism of Judaism. So all of our push is really just to get people exposed in that way.
It's amazing. So you mentioned this idea of the chat rabbi, which is fascinating. I had no idea. So what is it, if somebody hasn't been to H.com, what are they going to find there? What is it important that they know about that they can access?
Yeah, I think at H.com is what's amazing about it. And as I travel the world, it doesn't matter how religious or secular someone is, everyone goes to H.com for some article on something Jewish. And especially, like so many of us that may be religious, we have so much family and friends that aren't religious. And it's a place where you can easily, it doesn't matter how obscure, the holiday is, there's a fast coming up and someone asks you a question about it, boom, you can grab an article or a video from there. And just, what they'll find is just easy explanations, Judy, and things that are intellectually stimulating. We also have something which is born out of Corona. It was called HTV, which basically what happened was when we kind of had to shut our doors at our World Center for obvious reasons. What we did was we said, okay, what are we going to do with all our rabbis and our teaching? Well, let's move it online, and we morphed over to something called HTV, and so there's tons of classes now on all kinds of topics that are now available. So even the website now is going heavily into video and teaching and all those things. I think that's what you would find. It's just a place where, in a very easy way, you could find something even for someone who's very knowledgeable of Judaism, who'll discover something interesting. But you'll also find kind of easy starter, non-committal.
Low barrier.
Exactly, low barrier. Because the big barrier for us so much, and this better than anyone, right, Brand, is like just people to walk into like a shul or a base medrash. It's like people get a little nervous. If you could just, open your phone or your laptop and no one's around even and just look whatever articles you want, it makes it really easy.
That's awesome. And I think it's important for people, like you said, of all backgrounds to be aware of that, because that could be a resource that, people in Chicago, whether you are learning a Tosfos or you're learning Aleph Beis for the first time, it's something that, especially now during Corona, like you said about the TV people, the HTV, that's something that people can access because they can't get out in person. That's just, it's a resource that people need to know about that they can tap into.
Absolutely. For years, one of the most requested classes we've had online is the world famous H Discovery. H famously, I'm sure many people are aware, had this program. In fact, it's probably someone once, I saw it written in a paper for Rutgers, someone wrote it's probably the most well-attended seminar in Jewish history. Discovery really was about God, discovering God. And it was our famous seminar. And people always ask for it online video. And we really were hesitant because really we wanted people to have a teacher to explain it, And now during Corona, we put it online and people have been clamoring for it to do more of it and kind of, so we're trying to do it. But again, it's great for people to be online and learn online. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, they do have to come face to face with another Jew or a rabbi or someone. And that's one of the greatest things we do at the rabbis on H.com is, in the end of the day, when they create a relationship with someone, they try to hand them back to a local educator or a local rabbi or someone in their community. Because really, at the end of the day, you need a warm, friendly body to connect to.
And that, I guess, brings us to a point that maybe we could be thinking about, even when we are in this stay at home, is to remind us of the perspective of thinking about Jews in our neighborhood, even if they're not in our shul and they're not on our, Shabbos knock on the door list. How do we raise our consciousness of those people in our neighborhood, which, it's awkward, it's weird, I don't know, like, how do we pick ourselves up and say, we just got to do that. We just got to reach out to them.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all around us. And literally every one of our block. I always tell people we have something called H's Project Inspire, where we try to encourage Orthodox Jews to reach out to non-Orthodox Jews. Sometimes we're not so friendly. We're not as friendly as we think. Oh, what do you mean? I have a kiddush. People, but it really takes a lot of effort. And one of the things I always tell people, and they're like, I don't really know any non-from Jews. I'm like, well, who's your doctor? Who's your lawyer? I start going down a list of professionals they interact with. Like, yeah, my dentist is Jewish, but I don't know if he'd be interested. Well, you don't know if you haven't asked, And I think it's so important for Jews just to be warm, welcoming, and let people know the door's open, and let people know that there are ways for them to explore their own heritage before many of them get lost to the Jewish people.
Yeah, so are there things that you found that people, let's say local people, like they're living in Chicago, they're in West Rogers Park, they're in Skokie, they're in Lincolnwood, you know, Northbrook, wherever they are, Lakeview, what are practical things that people can do in this age? I wonder if on the one hand, it's a challenge because, you know, I'm not going to show up to somebody's door with a mask and homemade food necessarily, might be weirding them out. On the other hand, it's an opportunity because, you know, if you can connect with somebody online, it gives them a little more space to engage without feeling like, you know, you're breathing down their neck trying to buy them a garton.
Totally, you know, and again, we're at this really funny place now, where on the one hand, people are very nervous and very open, you know, to community. On the other hand, they're very nervous. Look, I've said for a long time, I think that all Jewish Orthodox institutions need to recheck the way they reach out. You know, one of the things I've talked about for a long time was the fact that if you walk into a lot of Orthodox schools today, we don't have kippah. When I was a kid, we used to have a kippah box, and we used to have a doily box for women. We used to have these doily. I don't know,
Yes.
I'm dating myself perhaps, but you know, we used to walk in. Oh yeah, you remember the doilies.
We used to call them the Saul Levinson yarmulkes because in Baltimore, the most famous prominent funeral home is called Saul Levinson and Brothers. So they used to give out those like special yarmulkes, you know, I'm talking about the final ones.
Yeah, for sure.
We, of course.
Absolutely. So I think we have to reassess all of our institutions. I know it's an individual thing, but it's also institution wide. Are we open? Right? If someone walked in, there's a pastor, one of these mega churches. I'll never forget hearing this. They asked him, you know, how he made sure that his mega church was welcoming. It got so big. He said that once a week he would park in the furthest parking spot from his church. And he would walk in and he would take that trek and he would try to imagine what it was like to walk into his church for the first time, right? You know, is there someone greeting people? Is there someone welcoming people? Are people able to find a seat? He would just ask himself all those questions. And I think to now that we've kind of been kicked out of shul, right? And now we're about to go back into our shuls, you know, Mitzvah Hashem. I personally am still diving in the backyard of my shul. I haven't made it inside yet. But when we walk in our shuls, are we going to look around and say, what would it be like for someone to walk in here the first time? Is there enough things in English? I'm not just talking about art scroll. You know, is there English signs? Is there someone to help people? So I could tell you so many stories of people that tried to go into shuls and just like felt like so adamant and just kind of left, you know? So I think it's combined. Number one is that we take this time, not only that our shuls are healthy, that we know how to wipe everything down clean and we know how to disinfect, right, which is important, but also how do we make sure that our synagogues, as we go back into them, are open to everyone else, right? And what projects? I've often felt that every shul in America has to have a vice president of outreach because, first of all, it's pure business. If you want to build your clientele or you want to build your membership list, the best way to do it is to reaching out to the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews that don't have a synagogue. And I think, you know, if we kind of focus that and we have the conversation, look, you know, we got kicked out of our shuls, we're going back into our shuls. Hashem, what's the message to Hashem? Well, part of it is, let me see if I can get some of my brothers and sisters to come back with me. Like how beautiful a message that would be. And then just sit down and just brainstorm. And there are easy ways to brainstorm programs to help people.
Amazing. Well, thank you for the time. I think that is such an important perspective as we're making that turn out of this pandemic, please God. Hashem should help us. Like you said, coming back to shul, what are our institutions like? What is our perspective on thinking about that? And from your perspective, it's incredible because what you're building, what you're leading really is the model for how we can think about being open to all Jews. So I hope you stay well. I hope you'll be able to travel at some point, maybe soon. And when you're next time in Chicago, we got to catch up.
Absolutely. It'd be great to see you and all of the folks that are with you. And Hashem should bless you with tremendous Torah growth and personal growth for your whole community.
Amen. You too. Thanks so much for the time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Really an honor to welcome such important guests. We opened up this morning welcoming Rabbi Daniel Karapkin, who spoke to us both from a general, I guess you could say, from a national perspective, but also from a personal perspective of how we balance the public policy and also the personal touch in terms of navigating the complicated situation of Corona and understanding what the RCA has done and continues to do to support our rabbis and our communities. We had our back-to-back mental health professionals, 2 psychologists, 1 local, that was Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Sova, who focused on adolescents and understanding where they're up to and the challenges and giving them space and encouraging them to break out a little bit. And then Dr. Muscat thinking about it from a little bit of an older adolescent, young professional standpoint, and then from a community standpoint, especially thinking about women. And then Rabbi Berg thinking about community and how we re-enter community in this post, you go this transitional phase, getting out, please God, of the pandemic. So it's been an amazing and enriching morning. I thank you all for joining us. Looking forward to another week of Torah learning connected, at least virtually. Have a great